Blood trickled down Zion's face as security dragged him and his twin sister Zara from first-class seats. Passengers filmed, flight attendants smirked. Then the cabin fell silent as an imposing black man in an expensive suit entered. "That's my son and daughter you're assaulting," he announced. "Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling. The story you're about to hear will make you question everything about the way airlines treat certain passengers. Are you ready to see what happens when prejudice meets unexpected power?" 17-year-old twins, Zion and Zara Williams, stood in their bedroom, carefully packing their suitcases for what promised to be the most important summer of their young lives. Both had been accepted to Yale University's prestigious summer program for exceptional high school students, an achievement that still felt surreal to them. "You think we packed enough business casual?" Zara asked, folding another neatly pressed blouse into her luggage. Unlike her brother, who preferred bold streetwear, Zara dressed conservatively, her wardrobe a collection of tailored blazers and pencil skirts that made her look older than her 17 years. Zion tossed a pair of limited edition sneakers into his case. "You packed enough business casual for both of us," he teased. "These Yale professors are going to think you're applying for a job at an accounting firm. And they'll think you're lost on your way to a hip-hop concert." Zara shot back, but her smile revealed the easy banter between them. Despite their different styles, the twins shared identical academic achievements, perfect GPAs, national merit scholarships, and now, acceptance to one of the most competitive pre-college programs in the country. From downstairs, their father's voice boomed up the staircase. "Dinner's ready. Last meal before my scholars head off to the Ivy League." Jabari Williams stood in the dining room of their spacious Atlanta home, placing a homemade lasagna on the table. At 6'3" with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, Jabari filled any room he entered. He'd raised the twins alone since their mother died from cancer when they were 10, balancing his demanding corporate career with single parenthood. What the twins didn't know, what almost nobody knew yet, was that Jabari had recently been appointed the new CEO of Horizon Airlines, one of the country's largest carriers. The press release wouldn't go out until next week. "Dad, we're just going for the summer program," Zara said, taking her seat at the table. "We haven't actually gotten into Yale yet." "Yet," Jabari emphasized, serving his children generous portions. "But after this summer, those admission officers would be fools not to accept you both. I'm already practicing my proud father speech for your graduation." "4 years away, Dad," Zion laughed, reaching for the garlic bread. "A father plans ahead," Jabari replied with a wink. "Speaking of which, I have something for you too." He pulled 2 envelopes from his pocket and slid them across the table. The twins exchanged curious glances before opening them. "First-class tickets?" Zara gasped, her eyes widening. "Dad, these must have cost a fortune," Zion added, examining the ticket with disbelief. Jabari waved away their concerns. "Consider it an early graduation present. You've both worked incredibly hard. You deserve to start this journey in style." What he didn't mention was that, as incoming CEO, he'd arranged the tickets himself. He also didn't tell them he would be at the airport tomorrow for his first executive meeting at Horizon's Atlanta headquarters. He wanted to surprise them later. "One more thing," Jabari said, his tone turning serious. "I know you two can handle yourselves, but remember what we've talked about when traveling." The twins nodded solemnly. These conversations were a necessary ritual in their household, the special instructions Black parents gave their children about navigating a world that often viewed them with suspicion. "Keep your IDs accessible," Zion recited. "Remain calm, regardless of provocation," Zara continued. "Speak clearly and respectfully, even when others don't deserve respect," Zion added. "And call me immediately if there's any trouble," Jabari finished. "I'm just a phone call away." The next morning arrived with the bright promise of new adventures. The twins hugged their father goodbye at home, Jabari pretending he needed to head to work in the opposite direction, and took a rideshare to Atlanta International Airport. The massive airport terminal bustled with summer travelers. As they rolled their luggage through the main entrance, The twins immediately noticed the demographic shift. Their neighborhood was predominantly black, but here, the crowd was mostly white business people rushing to destinations with entitled urgency. At the security checkpoint, they got their first taste of the different standards applied to different travelers. The TSA agent barely glanced at the IDs of the white passengers ahead of them, but scrutinized the twins' driver's licenses with unnecessary thoroughness. "These are temporary IDs?" the agent questioned, though they clearly weren't. "No, sir, standard. Georgia driver's licenses," Zara replied politely. The agent muttered before reluctantly waving them through. Zion exchanged a knowing look with his sister as they collected their belongings from the scanner. It was a familiar experience, the constant need to prove they belonged in spaces others entered without question. They navigated through the sprawling concourses toward their gate, passing luxury shops where staff tracked them with suspicious eyes while ignoring the white teenagers freely browsing the same merchandise. "You nervous?" Zion asked as they approached their gate. "About the flight?" "No." "About spending 6 weeks surrounded by trust fund kids who'll assume we're diversity admissions?" "A little," Zara admitted. "We earned our spots," Zion reminded her. "Our test scores and recommendations speak for themselves." Zara nodded, drawing confidence from her brother's words. "And now we get to fly first class like those trust fund kids." "Courtesy of Dad working 60-hour weeks," Zion added, having no idea how their father had actually arranged the upgrade. When the gate agent announced priority boarding for first-class passengers, the twins joined the line, noticing immediately how they stood out among the business travelers in expensive suits and designer luggage. Several passengers did double takes as Zion and Zara presented their boarding passes. The gate agent, unlike the others, smiled genuinely. "Enjoy your first time in first class," she said, correctly guessing their excitement. As they walked down the jet bridge, Zara texted their father, "Boarding now. Thanks again for the amazing tickets." Miles away, in his car heading to the airport for his executive meeting, Jabari smiled at the message. He couldn't wait to surprise them later. He had no way of knowing that his children would need him much sooner than any of them anticipated. The warm welcome at the gate quickly evaporated as Zion and Zara stepped onto the aircraft. Flight attendant Jessica Whitman, a blonde woman in her 40s with a permanently pinched expression, immediately blocked their path into the first-class cabin. "Excuse me," Jessica said with exaggerated politeness that didn't reach her eyes. "You're boarding with first class, but I believe economy is still boarding later." Zara maintained her composure, presenting their boarding passes. "We have first-class tickets. Seats 3A and 3B. Jessica took the boarding passes, examining them with obvious suspicion. "These are actually first class," she muttered, sounding genuinely surprised. "How unusual." "Is there a problem?" Zion asked, keeping his voice deliberately level. "No problem," Jessica replied with a tight smile. "I just need to verify these. It's procedure." The twins noticed that no other first-class passengers, all white, had their tickets verified beyond the standard scan. Nevertheless, they followed Jessica to their assigned seats, acutely aware of the stares from other passengers. Their seats were in the third row, plush leather chairs with ample legroom and personal entertainment screens. Zara slid into the window seat while Zion took the aisle. Despite the uncomfortable welcome, they couldn't help but exchange excited glances at the luxury surrounding them. "Can I see your IDs as well?" Jessica appeared beside them again, hand extended expectantly. "Is this standard procedure for all passengers?" Zara asked, already knowing the answer as she watched white teenagers across the aisle settling into their seats undisturbed. "It is when we need to verify ticket authenticity," Jessica replied sharply. The twins produced their driver's licenses, which Jessica scrutinized far longer than necessary. In the adjacent row, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit watched the interaction with unconcealed disdain. "Those seats cost $4,000 each," the man remarked loudly to his seatmate. "Hard to imagine how some people afford them." Jessica returned their IDs with obvious reluctance. "These appear to be in order, but I'll need to check with..." The gate agent to confirm your reservation. As she walked away, Zion leaned toward his sister. Should we call Dad? Let's wait, Zara whispered back. You know how he gets. He'll drive straight to the airport and make a scene. They had no idea he was already en route for his executive meeting. Jessica returned minutes later, this time accompanied by another flight attendant, a younger woman who looked uncomfortable with the situation. There seems to be some confusion about your tickets, Jessica announced. First class is fully booked for preferred members. That's not possible, Zara replied firmly. We have assigned seats right here, purchased weeks ago. Perhaps there was a computer glitch, Jessica suggested. We can accommodate you in economy. The flight isn't even full, Zion observed, pointing to several empty first-class seats. And our tickets clearly show these assigned seats. The man in the adjacent row, whose name badge identified him as Connor Reynolds, CEO of a financial services company, cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, he interjected. Some of us paid a premium for a certain first-class experience. Perhaps these young people would be more comfortable elsewhere. We paid for these seats too, Zion responded, his patience waning despite his father's warnings about staying calm. Did you? Connor asked with a smirk. Or did someone else? Jessica seemed emboldened by Connor's intervention. If you obtained these tickets fraudulently, Zara interrupted, her voice rising slightly. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Jessica said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But first-class tickets for minors traveling alone is unusual. We need to ensure everything is legitimate. By now, other passengers were openly watching the confrontation. Some recorded with their phones while others whispered among themselves. Most seemed to side with the flight attendant, their expressions ranging from amusement to outright hostility. We're 17, not 12, Zion pointed out, and there's nothing in Horizon Airlines policy that prevents minors from flying first class with proper tickets, which we have. Jessica's eyes narrowed at his knowledge of airline policy. The captain has been informed of a seating verification issue. We'll need to resolve this before departure. Over the PA system, the captain announced, Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay due to a seating verification issue. We apologize for the inconvenience and expect to depart shortly. Several passengers groaned, casting accusatory glances at the twins. See what you've caused? Connor said loudly. Some people just don't know their place. Zion's hands clenched into fists on his armrests, but Zara placed a calming hand on his arm, reminding him of their father's warnings. This is racial profiling, Zara stated clearly, pulling out her phone. I'm calling our father. There's no need to make accusations, Jessica snapped. And please put your phone away during the pre-flight period. The doors aren't closed, and we're not moving, Zion pointed out. She has every right to use her phone. Jessica's face flushed with anger. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to request security. Disruptive? Zara echoed in disbelief. We're sitting in our assigned seats showing our valid tickets and IDs. How is that disruptive? Your tone and attitude are creating an uncomfortable environment for other passengers, Jessica replied, gesturing toward Connor Reynolds, who nodded in agreement. Zara dialed their father's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Jabari was driving and hadn't yet reached the airport. Dad, we're having trouble on the flight. The attendants are questioning our tickets and threatening to remove us. Please call back. That's it, Jessica declared, pulling out her phone. I'm calling security. You've been given multiple opportunities to cooperate. Cooperate with what? Zion demanded. We've shown our tickets, our IDs, and we're sitting in our assigned seats. What rule have we broken? But Jessica had already turned away, speaking quietly into her phone while casting backward glances at the twins. Across the aisle, Connor Reynolds smiled smugly, clearly satisfied with the unfolding situation. It's because we're black, Zara whispered to her brother. You know that, right? Zion nodded grimly. I know, but what can we do? Document everything, Zara replied, discreetly positioning her phone to record. Dad always says to create a record. Neither of them realized that their father was now pulling into the executive parking area at Atlanta International Airport. about to attend his first meeting as Horizon Airline's new CEO. Two airport security officers approached the first-class cabin with determined strides. The lead officer, Keith Matthews, a stocky white man with a military-style haircut and mirrored sunglasses, scanned the cabin before fixing his gaze on the twins. Behind him followed a younger officer who looked considerably more hesitant. "These two?" Keith asked Jessica, who nodded emphatically. "They've been argumentative and disruptive," she reported, refusing to comply with crew instructions. "That's not true," Zara protested, still recording discreetly. "We've simply been asking which instructions we supposedly haven't followed." Keith ignored her completely, addressing only Zion. "I need you both to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." "Sir, we have valid tickets for these seats," Zion explained, reaching for his boarding pass. "There's been a misunderstanding." As Zion stood slightly to retrieve the document from his pocket, Keith immediately tensed and placed a hand on his holstered taser. "Sir, remain seated." "I'm just getting my ticket," Zion explained, freezing in position. "Do it slowly," Keith ordered, his hand still on his weapon. The cabin had gone completely silent, all eyes on the unfolding scene. Connor Reynolds watched with barely concealed satisfaction, while other passengers recorded the confrontation on their phones. Zion carefully extracted his boarding pass and held it out. "See? Seat 3B, first class, purchased legally." Keith barely glanced at the document. "The issue isn't your ticket anymore. The flight crew has the authority to remove any passenger they deem disruptive, and they've made that determination." "Based on what?" Zara demanded, her voice rising with indignation. "We've done nothing wrong." "Young lady, put that phone down now," Keith ordered, noticing her recording. "Recording security personnel is prohibited." "That's not true," Zara countered. "FAA regulations allow passengers to record as long as it doesn't interfere with crew duties. We're documenting this discrimination." At the word discrimination, Keith's expression hardened. "Last chance. Both of you gather your belongings and come with us quietly, or we'll remove you forcibly." Zion and Zara exchanged desperate glances. They'd been raised to stand up for themselves, but also to recognize when a situation with authorities might turn dangerous. This moment was balancing on a knife's edge. "We'll file a formal complaint," Zion said, reaching for his backpack. "This is wrong." "Your complaint." "Our aircraft," Keith replied dismissively. "Let's go." As the twins began gathering their belongings, Connor Reynolds snickered audibly. "Finally, now we can take off without further disturbances." Something in his smug satisfaction pushed Zion past his breaking point. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching two black teenagers being humiliated for daring to sit in first class?" "Zion, don't!" Zara whispered urgently. Keith grabbed Zion's arm roughly. "That's enough. You're coming with me now." "Don't touch me," Zion replied instinctively, pulling away. What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. Keith interpreted the withdrawal as resistance and immediately escalated, yanking Zion forward and twisting his arm behind his back. When Zion cried out in pain, Keith forced him face down across the seats. "Stop it!" Zara screamed, still recording. "You're hurting him." The second security officer moved toward Zara. "Hand over the phone, miss." "No," she refused, backing against the window. "You have no right." The officer lunged for the phone, and Zara raised her arm to keep it out of reach. In the struggle, her elbow accidentally caught the officer in the chest. "Assault on an officer!" he shouted, grabbing her wrist with painful force. Seeing his sister manhandled, Zion struggled against Keith's hold. "Get off her!" Keith responded by slamming Zion's head against the armrest. Blood immediately began flowing from a gash above his eyebrow. "Oh my God!" Zara screamed, watching blood drip onto the gray carpet. "You're bleeding him!" Several passengers gasped at the sudden violence. A few stood up, uncomfortable with the excessive force. "Stay in your seats," Keith barked at them while handcuffing Zion, pressing his knee into the teenager's back. The second officer had wrestled Zara's phone away and was now twisting her arms behind her back for handcuffing. She continued to protest, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother's blood pool on the floor. "You're going to jail for assaulting an officer," the second security guard told her. "Both of you. Hope that first-class ticket was worth it." As they roughly hauled the twins to their feet, blood continued streaming down Zion's face, dripping onto his white t-shirt. No one offered him a tissue or any medical attention. "Still recording, folks?" Keith asked the surrounding passengers mockingly. "Make sure you get their perp walk out of here." Some passengers laughed. Others looked away, ashamed but unwilling to intervene. A few continued recording silently, their expressions troubled. As the twins were dragged toward the exit, Zara managed to press the emergency location sharing button on her smartwatch, a feature their father had insisted they set up for emergencies. The alert with their exact location was now transmitting to Jabari Williams' phone. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," Keith muttered as they pushed the twins down the jet bridge. "Acting entitled to spaces you don't belong in." "My father will hear about this," Zara said through tears. "Sure he will, sweetheart," Keith laughed. "I'm sure he's very important." Neither the security officers nor the twins could have imagined just how important Jabari Williams actually was, or that at that very moment he was stepping into Horizon Airlines headquarters, checking his phone, and seeing his children's emergency alert flashing on the screen. Have you ever witnessed racial profiling at an airport or on a plane? Comment number 1 if you've experienced or seen this kind of discrimination yourself, or number 2 if you've been fortunate enough to avoid it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that expose the reality of everyday racism in America. What do you think will happen when the twins' father discovers what's happening to his children? Will Jabari arrive in time to prevent further harm? Or is this situation about to get much worse? Zion and Zara Williams sat in separate interrogation rooms in the airport security office, 3 floors below the main terminal, where most passengers never ventured. The rooms were nearly identical, windowless boxes with cement walls painted, institutional beige, furnished with only a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 uncomfortable chairs. In room 1, Zion sat with his head bowed, blood still trickling from the gash above his eyebrow. The flow had slowed, but without proper treatment. It continued to seep through the thin paper towel they'd reluctantly provided. His white t-shirt was now stained with a disturbing pattern of crimson splotches. His wrists bore angry red marks from the overly tight handcuffs they'd finally removed after 20 minutes of his complaints. "Explain again. How you obtained these tickets," demanded Officer Brenda Mercer, a stern-faced woman who hadn't introduced herself but whose name was visible on her badge. "For the 3rd time," Zion replied, his voice hoarse from repeating the same information. "They were a gift from our father. He purchased them legally. You can call him to verify." "We've tried the number you provided," Mercer lied. "They hadn't called anyone." No answer. "Then try again," Zion insisted. "Or check with the airline. The tickets are in our names, purchased weeks ago." Mercer ignored his suggestion, instead sliding crime scene-style photos of the first-class cabin across the table. "Witnesses say you became aggressive when asked to move to your correct seats." "Those were our correct seats," Zion countered, fatigue evident in his voice. "And I never became aggressive. That's a lie." "Multiple witnesses contradict your version," Mercer stated flatly, "including flight attendants and other passengers." "Were these witnesses all white?" Zion asked pointedly. Mercer's expression hardened. "Playing the race card won't help your situation." "It's not a card, it's my life," Zion replied, pressing the blood-soaked paper towel against his wound. "Can I please get medical attention?" "Medical attention comes after processing," Mercer informed him coldly. "And speaking of processing, falsifying airline tickets is a federal offense." "We didn't falsify anything." Zion's composure finally cracked. "Why won't you just check with the airline?" "We're handling this by the book," Mercer replied, gathering her papers. "Sit tight. This could take hours." As she left, Zion heard the distinct sound of a lock engaging. They were treating him like a criminal for the crime of sitting in seats they'd legally purchased. In room 2, Zara faced a different kind of intimidation. Officer Diane Lowell had taken a seemingly sympathetic approach, offering tissues for Zara's tears and speaking in a gentle voice that belied her hostile questions. "Honey, This would all go much easier if you'd just admit what happened, Lowell coaxed. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe you and your brother found those tickets, or someone gave them to you not realizing they were already assigned to other passengers. The tickets were purchased legally, Zara insisted, her voice steadier than she felt. Our father bought them as a graduation gift. We're on our way to Yale's summer program. Yale? Lowell repeated with obvious disbelief. That's quite a claim. It's not a claim, it's a fact. Our acceptance letters are in my backpack. Where are our belongings? Being searched, Lowell informed her. Standard procedure when we receive tips about possible contraband. Contraband? Zara echoed in disbelief. What tips? Anonymous. Passenger reported possible drug activity, Lowell said casually. Mentioned unusual behavior and suspicious objects being passed between you and your brother. That's absurd. We've never touched drugs in our lives. We'll let the search determine that, Lowell replied. In the meantime, I need to conduct a personal search as well. Zara stiffened. A personal search? You can't be serious. Standard procedure with drug suspicions, Lowell insisted. Female officer to female suspect. I'm not a suspect. I'm a victim, Zara protested, tears threatening again. I want to call my father. I have rights. Rights can be temporarily suspended during airport security investigations, Lowell claimed falsely. You can make calls after we complete processing. As this psychological torment continued in the security office, 12 floors above in Horizon, Airline's executive suite, Jabari Williams was experiencing his own form of hell. He'd arrived for his first executive meeting, phone silenced as a professional courtesy, unaware of his children's desperate voicemail or the emergency alert that had come through moments before he entered the boardroom. It was only when he excused himself to use the restroom 15 minutes into the meeting that he checked his phone and saw the alerts. His blood ran cold as he listened to Zara's voicemail, followed by Zion's similar message. The emergency location ping showed they were still in the airport, not on their flight to Connecticut as scheduled. Jabari immediately called both their numbers. No answer. He texted. No response. With mounting panic, he returned to the boardroom, where Horizon's executive team, his new direct reports, none of whom had met him in person yet, were reviewing quarterly projections. I apologize, Jabari interrupted, his voice tight with controlled fear. But I have a family emergency. My children were supposed to be on flight 1382 to Hartford, but something's wrong. They're still in the airport and not answering their phones. Patricia Delaney, the airline's operations director, looked up with concern. Flight 1382? There was an incident reported before takeoff. 2 unruly passengers were removed by security. Jabari's stomach dropped. Those passengers were my 17-year-old twins. The room fell silent as the executives processed this information. Your children? Patricia checked her tablet quickly. Williams? Zion and Zara Williams? Yes, Jabari confirmed, already moving toward the door. Where would security take them? Lower level concourse E, Patricia replied, following him. But sir, the report says they became confrontational when found in first-class seats with economy tickets. They had first-class tickets, Jabari corrected her, striding toward the elevator. I purchased them myself. Patricia looked confused. That's not what the report indicates. Then the report is wrong, Jabari stated firmly, and I need to find my children immediately. As the elevator doors closed, Patricia made a quick call to security. What she learned in that brief conversation made her face pale. The incident report included charges of assault on officers and resisting removal. One of the perpetrators had sustained injuries requiring medical attention. Meanwhile, back in Daurias, the interrogation rooms, the situation was deteriorating further. An officer had returned to Zion's room with the twins' searched belongings, including Zara's backpack. Yale acceptance letters, the officer noted, tossing the prestigious embossed documents onto the table with disdain. Nice fakes. They're not fake, Zion insisted, too exhausted to show proper outrage anymore. Right, and I'm Harvard faculty, the officer snorted. Listen, kid, we found your real tickets. Economy class, row 32. Want to explain why you were trying to steal first-class seats? Zion looked up in genuine confusion. What are you talking about? We never had economy tickets. The officer slid 2 economy boarding passes across the table. Boarding passes Zion had never seen before, with the twins' names clearly printed on them. These aren't ours, Zion stated firmly, recognizing the forgery attempt. Someone created these to justify what happened to us. Our real tickets were first class. Doubling down on the lie? The officer shook his head. Makes your situation worse. We're talking potential fraud charges now. In the adjacent room, Zara had finally been allowed to use the restroom, accompanied by Officer Lowell, who insisted on leaving the door partially open. Another humiliation in a day full of them. When they returned, a new figure waited in the interrogation room, a tall white man in an expensive suit. Zara Williams? The man asked, extending his hand. I'm Gregory Pearson, head of security for Horizon Airlines. Zara didn't take his offered hand. Are you here to explain why we were assaulted and dragged off a plane for sitting in seats we paid for? Pearson's professional smile didn't waver. I understand there's been a misunderstanding. According to our records, you and your brother were ticketed for economy class. That's a lie, Zara stated flatly. Our father purchased first-class tickets. For us. I want to call him right now. Of course, Pearson replied smoothly, placing a phone on the table. Please, go ahead. Suspecting a trick, Zara dialed her father's number with shaking fingers. To her surprise, he answered immediately. Dad, she cried, relief flooding her voice. Zara! Thank God! Where are you? Where's Zion? Jabari's voice was tight with controlled panic. We're being held by airport security, she explained quickly. They dragged us off the plane, and they hurt Zion. He's bleeding. Pearson abruptly reached over and pressed the speaker button. Mr. Williams, this is Gregory Pearson, head of security for Horizon Airlines. I apologize for this situation. There seems to be some confusion about your children's ticket class. There's no confusion, Jabari's voice boomed through the speaker, causing Pearson to flinch slightly. My children had first-class tickets that I personally arranged. What I want to know is why they've been detained, why my son is injured, and exactly where you're holding them. Something in Jabari's authoritative tone made Pearson straighten his posture unconsciously. Sir, we're following standard protocols. I don't care about your protocols, Jabari interrupted. I care about my children, and as the new chief executive officer of Horizon Airlines, I'm ordering you to take me to them immediately. The color drained from Pearson's face. Chief, you're the new CEO? As of this morning, Jabari confirmed. Now, where are my children? Before Pearson could respond, the door burst open and Patricia Delaney appeared with Jabari right behind her. The moment Zara saw her father, she launched herself into his arms, sobbing with relief. Where's Zion? Jabari demanded, holding his daughter protectively. Next room, Pearson stammered, suddenly looking very concerned about his job security. As Jabari moved toward the door, still holding Zara, he fixed Pearson with a glare that made the security chief physically step back. I suggest you start drafting your resignation letter. Across the city, Connor Reynolds was settling back into his first-class seat, satisfied that the flight was finally preparing for takeoff after the unfortunate delay. He had no idea that his smug satisfaction was about to be very short-lived. The door to Zion's interrogation room flew open with such force that Officer Mercer jumped to her feet, hand instinctively moving to her holster. The movement froze midway as she registered who stood in the doorway. A commanding black man, an immaculate suit, radiating controlled fury, with Zara beside him and a growing entourage of anxious airline officials behind them. Zion! Jabari rushed to his son, horrified by the blood staining his shirt and the untreated wound still seeping above his eye. My God, what have they done to you? Dad? Zion's voice cracked with emotion, the tough facade he'd maintained during hours of interrogation finally crumbling at the sight of his father. Jabari turned to Officer Mercer, his expression thunderous. Why hasn't my son received medical attention? We were following protocol for detainees, Mercer began. Detainees? Jabari cut her off. My children are victims, not criminals. Get a medical team in here immediately. Patricia Delaney was already on her phone. Medical response to Security Office E42, Priority 1. Officer Mercer looked between Jabari and the airline executives with growing confusion. Sir, I don't know who you are, but this is a security matter under airport jurisdiction. Gregory Pearson cleared his throat nervously. Officer Mercer, this is Jabari Williams, the new Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Airlines. The revelation landed like a bomb in the small room. Mercer's jaw literally dropped, while another security officer in the hallway audibly gasped. That's not possible, Mercer stammered. We would have been informed. My appointment was announced internally this morning, Jabari explained coldly. The public announcement isn't scheduled until next week, but I assure you, I am very much in charge of this airline. He turned his attention back to Zion, gently examining the wound. The cut needs stitches. Who did this to you? Security officer named Keith, Zion replied. He slammed my head into the armrest when I tried to stop them from hurting Zara. Jabari's expression darkened further. Where is this Keith now? Probably back on patrol, Mercer admitted, suddenly looking very concerned about the trajectory of her career. Find him, Jabari ordered. I want him in front of me within the hour. Patricia nodded to an assistant who immediately hurried off. Dad, Zara interjected. They're claiming we had economy tickets. They showed us fake boarding. Passes with our names. What? Jabari turned to Patricia. Explain this. Patricia looked genuinely confused. According to the incident report, the flight attendant verified they had economy tickets but were attempting to occupy first-class seats. That's a lie, Zion insisted. We had first-class tickets. Dad bought them for us. He's right, Jabari. Confirmed. I personally arranged those tickets through the executive booking system. He turned to Patricia. Pull up the passenger manifest and reservation details. Patricia quickly accessed the information on her tablet. After a moment, her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. They're right. The original reservation shows first class. But there's an override entered this morning, downgrading them to economy without notification. Who entered that override? Jabari demanded. Patricia's face paled as she read the digital signature. Jessica Whitman, the flight attendant who reported the incident. Get her in here, Jabari ordered. And I want to see all security footage from the aircraft and terminals. Now. As medical personnel finally arrived to treat Zion's wound, the room became a flurry of activity. Airline executives made calls, security officers suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, and Mercer tried to blend into the wall, clearly hoping to escape notice. Officer Mercer, Jabari called, dashing her hopes. You questioned my son for hours while he was bleeding. You denied him medical attention. You accused him of crimes he didn't commit. I'll be having a separate conversation with your superiors about your conduct today. Mercer swallowed hard but said nothing. 30 minutes later, the scene had shifted to the airport's executive conference room. Zion's wound had been properly cleaned and closed with butterfly stitches by paramedics, though he'd need proper medical follow-up. The twins sat close to their father, still shaken but relieved to be out of the interrogation rooms. Across the table sat a visibly nervous Jessica Whitman, flanked by Keith Matthews and the airline's hurriedly summoned legal counsel. Security footage from the aircraft played on a large screen on the wall, showing the entire incident from multiple angles. As you can see, the security director narrated uncomfortably. Officer Matthews appears to use excessive force when restraining Mr. Williams, resulting in the head injury. Appears? Jabari repeated incredulously. My son was slammed face first into an armrest for the crime of sitting in a seat he paid for. The passenger was resisting, Keith began. Be very careful with your next words, Jabari warned him. I'm watching the same footage you are. On screen, the moment played again in horrible clarity. Zion pulling his arm away. Keith's disproportionate response, the shocking crack as Zion's head hit the metal armrest. Ms. Whitman, Jabari turned his attention to the flight attendant. The system shows you personally downgraded my children's tickets this morning. Care to explain why? Jessica shifted uncomfortably. I believe there was an error in the booking system. First class was overbooked. That's interesting, Patricia interjected, because the flight departed with 3 empty first-class seats after the twins were removed. And why did you specifically target my children's tickets? Jabari pressed. Why not the last bookings made? Jessica had no answer, her eyes fixed on the table. Let me suggest a theory, Jabari continued. You saw 2 black teenagers in first class and decided they couldn't possibly belong there. Rather than accept that they had legitimate tickets, you falsified airline records to justify removing them. That's preposterous, Jessica protested weakly. This isn't about race. Isn't it? Jabari pulled up another piece of footage. Jessica warmly welcoming white teenagers to first class on the same flight without questioning their tickets. You didn't ask these passengers for additional verification. The door opened, and a nervous airline employee entered with a folder. Sir, the information you requested about Ms. Whitman's employment history. Jabari opened the folder, scanning its contents with increasing disgust. 5 previous complaints of discriminatory treatment toward minority passengers, 2 formal reprimands, yet somehow you're still employed. Jessica paled. Those complaints were investigated and dismissed. By whom? Jabari asked pointedly. Before Jessica could respond, another interruption came. Connor Reynolds being escorted into the room by security. What is the meaning of this? Connor demanded, his indignation deflating slightly when he saw the assembled group. I have a connecting flight to catch. Mr. Reynolds, Jabari rose to his full height, towering over the businessman. I'm Jabari Williams, CEO of Horizon Airlines, and father of the 2 teenagers you helped humiliate and assault today. Connor's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. Those children are yours? He managed. My son and daughter, Jabari confirmed. Honor students accepted to Yale's summer program, flying on first-class tickets I personally arranged, until Ms. Whitman here decided they didn't look like they belonged. Connor glanced desperately toward the door. This is unfortunate, but I simply supported the flight attendant's assessment of a disruptive situation. The security footage shows you initiated the complaints, Jabari corrected him, making statements about how some people should know their place. I was merely concerned about the flight's punctuality, Connor attempted. We have 7 witness statements contradicting that claim, Patricia interjected, holding up a tablet with passenger accounts collected in the past hour. Connor's professional facade cracked. Look, there was clearly a misunderstanding. No, Jabari cut him off. There was no misunderstanding. There was prejudice, discrimination, falsification of airline records, excessive force, and assault against my children, while they were simply sitting in seats they paid for. He turned to the airline's legal counsel. I want a full investigation. Ms. Whitman and Officer Matthews are suspended effective immediately. Mr. Reynolds is permanently banned from Horizon Airlines. You can't do that, Connor protested. I'm the CEO. I just did, Jabari replied coldly. And I suggest you prepare for a very uncomfortable conversation with your own board of directors when the video of your behavior goes public. The color drained from Connor's face as he realized the extent of his predicament. His company prided itself on diversity initiatives that would appear deeply hypocritical alongside footage of him harassing black teenagers. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, Connor suggested, desperately. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. The time for private discussions was before my son's blood was spilled on your precious first-class carpet, Jabari replied. Now it becomes a matter of public record. As Connor was escorted out, Jabari turned back to Jessica and Keith. You traumatized my children based on your own prejudices. Then you falsified evidence to cover your actions. In what world did you think you'd get away with this? With all due respect, sir, Keith replied stiffly. We were responding to reports of disruptive passengers. We had no way of knowing who they were. Who they were, Jabari repeated incredulously. They were passengers with valid tickets. Their identities shouldn't matter. Would you have treated white teenagers the same way? Keith's silence was answer enough. Jabari checked his watch. Your unions will be notified of your suspensions within the hour. The investigation will determine whether termination and criminal charges follow. He turned to his still shaken children. Let's go home. You've missed your flight to Connecticut. As they stood to leave, Zara turned to her father. Dad, when were you going to tell us you're the CEO of Horizon Airlines? Jabari managed a small smile despite his anger. It was supposed to be a surprise. When I met your flight in Hartford tomorrow, I was going to be on the same plane, just in business class. That would have been a much better surprise than this one, Zion noted wryly, touching his bandaged forehead. As they walked out, the twins leaning against their father for support, the airline executives and security personnel watched in stunned silence. None could have imagined that their casual racism would lead to such consequences, or that the black teenagers they'd so readily mistreated were the children of the most powerful man in the company. What would you have done in the twins' situation? Comment number 1 if you would have stood your ground like they did, or number 2 if you think they should have just moved to avoid the conflict. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more stories that expose the reality of injustice in America. How do you think this incident will change Horizon Airlines? Will Jessica and Keith face real consequences, or will the company try to sweep everything under the rug once the initial outrage dies down? By midnight, the Williams family saga had transcended from a private trauma to a national conversation. While Zion and Zara rested at home, recovering from their ordeal, their names and faces were spreading across social media platforms at an extraordinary rate. It began with a TikTok video posted by a first-class passenger seated 2 rows behind the twins. The 60-second clip showed security officer Keith Matthews slamming Zion's head against the armrest, blood immediately spattering the light gray upholstery. The passenger's caption read, "Black teenagers assaulted by airport security for sitting in first class with valid tickets. The boy's head is bleeding and they're still dragging them off. Horizon racism, Chacher flying while black." Within an hour, the video had 2 million views. By dinner time, 7 million. Competing hashtags trended nationally. Horizon racism and Leiterschaft boycott Horizon dominated, while smaller but vocal contingents pushed Dahmer support Horizon security and Amar's respect flight crew. More videos emerged from different angles, each adding new details to the narrative. One particularly damning clip captured Connor Reynolds' smug remark about people knowing their place. Another showed Jessica Whitman smirking as the bleeding teenager was handcuffed. A third revealed Zara's desperate attempts to reach her father while being physically restrained. CNN broke the story on their evening broadcast. Tonight, shocking footage of 2 black honor students forcibly removed from first-class seats despite having valid tickets. The twist? Their father is the new CEO of the airline. Fox News took a different angle. Airline security under fire after forceful removal of passengers leads to PR disaster. But were protocols followed? MSNBC went with systemic racism and icism, the skies. How flying while black turned into a nightmare for 2 Yale-bound teenagers. In the Williams household, Jabari sat in his home office, monitoring the unfolding media storm while his children slept upstairs. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since they'd arrived home. He'd spoken directly with Horizon's board chairman, the FAA administrator, the airport authority director, and 3 civil rights attorneys. Now he was on a video call with Horizon's hastily assembled crisis management team. The statement needs to acknowledge the racial component explicitly, Jabari insisted, overruling the PR director's more sanitized draft. We can't hide behind corporate speak about unfortunate incidents and reviewing procedures. My children were profiled, assaulted, and falsely detained because they're black, period. Sir, the PR director argued, explicitly mentioning racial profiling opens the company to significant legal liability. We already have that liability, Jabari countered. What we need now is credibility. The videos are clear. Denying what? Everyone can see with their own eyes will only make this worse. As they debated, Jabari's personal phone lit up with a text from Patricia Delaney. You need to see this. Jessica Whitman just went on Newsmax. Live interview. Jabari quickly switched screens to the streaming feed. There sat Jessica, tearfully playing the victim. I was just following procedures, she insisted to the sympathetic host. Horizon Airlines is throwing me under the bus to appear politically correct. And the CEO's children just happened to be the ones you questioned? The host asked skeptically. I had no idea who they were, Jessica protested, and their behavior was threatening. The boy stood up aggressively when asked for identification. Jabari's blood pressure spiked. Not only was Jessica lying, but she was doubling down on portraying his son, who'd been nothing but polite until physically assaulted, as an aggressor. Get me legal on the phone, Jabari instructed his assistant. We need to issue a cease and desist immediately. She's violating her employment contract by discussing this publicly. Meanwhile, Keith Matthews had given his own interview to a local Atlanta station, portraying himself as a dedicated officer, just doing his job, who was now being scapegoated. If they'd simply complied with instructions, none of this would have happened, he claimed, conveniently omitting that his instructions had contradicted airline policy and federal law. As these counter-narratives emerged, social media exploded with polarized reactions. Some commenters blindly supported the security officer and flight attendant without viewing the evidence. Others called for their immediate arrest. The usual fault lines of American discourse revealed themselves in real time. Connor Reynolds faced his own nightmare. A financial reporter had recognized him in one of the videos and tagged his company. By morning, Twitter Fire Connor Reynolds was trending, with customers threatening to pull investments unless his financial services firm took action. The company's diversity officer had already resigned in protest, releasing a statement about years of ignored complaints regarding Reynolds' behavior. At Yale University, the summer program director issued a supportive statement. We are horrified by the treatment of our incoming students Zion and Zara Williams. We have extended their enrollment deadline and will provide any necessary accommodations for their recovery. This incident exemplifies why our summer program on justice in America remains so critically important. By morning, the story had evolved further. Investigative reporters had uncovered Jessica Whitman's troubling history, multiple complaints of discriminatory treatment toward minority passengers, all mysteriously resolved without consequences. One particularly disturbing incident involved a black military officer in uniform, whom Jessica had reported as suspicious, despite his credentials. Keith Matthews' record proved equally problematic. 2 excessive force complaints had been filed against him in the past year alone, both involving minority passengers. One case had been settled quietly with a non-disclosure agreement. At 7 a.m., Jabari's phone rang with a call from an unexpected source: the White House. The president's senior advisor wanted to discuss the incident and its implications for pending legislation on transportation equity. This video has resonated with millions of Americans who've experienced similar treatment, the advisor explained. The president is considering mentioning it in tomorrow's speech on civil rights. Upstairs, Zion awoke with a pounding headache. The medical examiner had diagnosed him with a mild concussion in addition to the laceration. He reached for his phone and was immediately overwhelmed by hundreds of notifications. Friends, teachers, distant relatives, and countless strangers had reached out with messages of support, outrage, and in some disturbing cases, racial slurs and threats. Zara entered his room carrying 2 mugs of tea. How's your head? Feels like someone slammed it into an armrest, Zion replied with grim humor. Have you seen what's happening online? Dad told us not to look, Zara reminded him, though she'd already spent an hour scrolling through reactions herself. Kind of hard to ignore when my phone won't stop buzzing, Zion pointed out. We're trending nationally. Not just nationally, Zara corrected him, showing her own screen. It's international now. BBC, Al Jazeera, even Korean news sites. Zion set down his phone with a sigh. So much for our low-profile summer at Yale. About that, Zara began carefully. Dad's downstairs talking to the program director. They're offering to delay our start date by 2 weeks to give you time to recover. No way, Zion said firmly. I'm not letting those racist jerks derail our plans. We worked too hard for this opportunity. Before Zara could respond, their father appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted but determined. He'd been up all night managing the crisis, yet somehow still projected the strength that had always made his children feel safe. "How are you? Feeling?" Jabari asked Zion. "Like I'm at the center of a social media hurricane," Zion replied. "Dad, people are sending death threats." Jabari's expression darkened. "We've engaged security for the house and online protection services. No one's going to hurt you." "What about Jessica and Keith?" Zara asked. "I saw them giving interviews, lying about what happened." "Both have been officially terminated this morning," Jabari informed them. "And the airline has filed a police report regarding the assault. They'll likely face criminal charges." "And Connor Reynolds?" Zion pressed. "His company placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation," Jabari said with grim satisfaction. "Their stock dropped 8% yesterday after the video went viral." A notification pinged on all their phones simultaneously. A breaking news alert. Jabari checked his screen and let out a surprised laugh. "What?" the twins asked in unison. "The Horizon Airlines board just voted unanimously to implement the Williams Protocol, a new set of anti-bias training requirements and accountability measures for all customer-facing staff," Jabari explained. "They named it after you two." "That's something, I guess," Zion said uncertainly. "But will it actually change anything?" Jabari sat on the edge of the bed. "That depends on what we do next. This isn't just about one incident or one airline. It's about the countless similar experiences that happen every day without viral videos or CEO parents to intervene." "So, what do we do?" Zara asked. Jabari looked at his children with pride. Despite everything they'd endured, they were asking how they could create change, not just seek justice for themselves. "We use this platform we didn't ask for," he replied. "We tell our story, demand accountability, and push for systemic changes. Starting with my first official act as CEO tomorrow." "Which is?" Zion prompted. "A complete overhaul of Horizon's hiring, training, and accountability systems," Jabari explained, "and a partnership with civil rights organizations to audit our practices regularly." Outside their peaceful discussion, the social media storm continued to intensify. The video had now been viewed over 50 million times. Cable news ran non-stop. Analysis. Talk show hosts prepared monologues. Politicians issued statements aligning with or against the family based on predictable partisan lines. What had begun as a simple journey to a summer program had become a national referendum on race in America. And for the Williams family, the most challenging part of their journey was just beginning. Have you ever had an experience that unexpectedly thrust you into the spotlight? Comment number 1, if you faced public attention for something in your life. Or number 2, if you've managed to stay out of the public eye. Like and subscribe to follow more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. What do you think will happen at the emergency board meeting? Will Jabari be able to implement real change, or will corporate interests push back against meaningful reform? The Horizon Airlines executive boardroom, with its mahogany table and panoramic views of Atlanta's skyline, had hosted countless meetings throughout the company's history, but none quite like this emergency session called just 48 hours. After the Williams twins incident, the tension in the air was palpable as board members arrived, many avoiding eye contact with Jabari Williams, who stood at the window watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, a fitting metaphor for the situation at hand. "I call this emergency meeting to order," announced Richard Hargrove, the 70-year-old board chairman whose family had helped found the airline 6 decades earlier. "I believe we all understand the gravity of our current predicament." The 12 board members took their seats around the table. Jabari noted the demographics with a grim lack of surprise. 10 white men, 1 white woman, and 1 Asian American man. Until his appointment, there had been no black executives at the C-suite level despite the company's public commitment to diversity. "Our stock has dropped 18% in 2 days, began CFO Walter Bradshaw, jumping straight to the financial impact. "Cancel rates are up 43%. We're facing at least 3 class action lawsuits from minority passengers alleging similar discriminatory treatment. Conservative estimates put the financial damage at $120 million and climbing. All because of an unfortunate misunderstanding, interjected Gerald Winters, the longest-serving board member and a close personal friend of Jessica Whitman's family, as Jabari had recently discovered. Had your children simply identified themselves as the CEO's family, none of this would have happened. Jabari, who had remained standing, slowly turned from the window. The room fell silent under his steady gaze. My children should not need to announce their relationship to me to be treated with basic human dignity, he stated, his voice controlled but vibrating with intensity. They presented valid tickets and identification. That should have been sufficient. Of course, Gerald backpedaled slightly. I merely suggest that a simple clarification could have prevented this entire situation. The situation, as you call it, is that my son's blood was spilled on your airplane because your staff couldn't believe 2 black teenagers belonged in first class, Jabari replied. The situation is that your security officer used excessive force against minors. The situation is that your flight attendant falsified company records to justify racial profiling. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No, one is disputing that mistakes were made, Richard attempted to mediate. We've already terminated the employees involved. After they were caught on video, Jabari pointed out. Not after the multiple prior complaints against them that were systematically ignored. He placed a thick folder on the table. This contains 37 formal discrimination complaints filed against Horizon Airlines in the past year alone. All were dismissed or settled with NDAs. This pattern suggests the issue isn't a few bad employees, but a corporate culture that enables and protects them. Walter Bradshaw cleared his throat. While these historical issues deserve attention, our immediate concern must be managing the current PR crisis. Our team has drafted a standard apology statement and compensation package for your children. My children aren't accepting hush money, Jabari cut him off. And neither am I. I didn't accept this position to maintain the status quo or protect the company from justified criticism. Then why did you accept it? Gerald asked pointedly. To transform it, Jabari replied simply. Horizon has the potential to be an industry leader, not just in profits, but in principles. That's why I've prepared this comprehensive reform proposal. He distributed tablets containing his plan to each board member. As they scrolled through the document, expressions ranged from thoughtful consideration to outright alarm. This is extensive, Richard commented diplomatically. It's radical, Gerald corrected with undisguised hostility. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, external oversight committee, transparency reports on passenger removal incidents. With demographic breakdowns, this would cost millions to implement. And failing to implement it will cost hundreds of millions in lawsuits and lost business, Jabari countered. Not to mention the incalculable cost of continuing to traumatize passengers based on their race. Patricia Delaney, who had been invited to present operational feasibility of the reforms, spoke up. I've reviewed the proposal in detail. While ambitious, it's actually quite implementable within our current operational framework. Many of these changes leverage existing systems with relatively minor modifications. That's not the point, Gerald insisted. This plan essentially admits systematic racism within our company. It's an invitation for more lawsuits, not fewer. The videos already flooding social media have done that, Jabari pointed out. We can either acknowledge reality and address it, or deny it and lose all credibility. The debate continued for hours, growing increasingly heated. Around midday, Jabari's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down and saw a breaking news headline. Exclusive. Jessica Whitman and Horizon board member Gerald Winters have family connection. Jabari looked up at Gerald, whose face had gone pale as his own phone lit up with the same alert. Something you forgot to disclose, Gerald? Jabari asked quietly. The room fell silent as other board members checked their phones, murmurs of surprise rippling around the table. Jessica is my wife's niece, Gerald admitted reluctantly. But that has nothing to do with the fact that she kept her job despite multiple serious complaints? Jabari finished for him. or that those complaints mysteriously disappeared from her file whenever they reached executive review. Richard Hargrove looked genuinely shocked. "Gerald, you never disclosed this conflict of interest?" "It wasn't relevant," Gerald insisted. "And this leak is clearly an attempt to distract from the real issue here, which is that our new CEO is using his children's unfortunate experience to push a personal agenda. My agenda is creating an airline where no one's children are assaulted for sitting in seats they paid for," Jabari replied evenly. "If that's controversial, perhaps Horizon isn't the company I thought it was." The implied threat hung in the air. Losing their newly appointed CEO in the midst of this crisis would be a devastating blow to shareholder confidence. Richard called for a brief recess, during which board members huddled in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers. When they reconvened, the dynamics had subtly shifted. "After consideration," Richard announced carefully, "the board recognizes that significant changes are indeed necessary. However, we propose a more measured approach, implementing these reforms gradually over 18 months rather than the 6-month timeline in your proposal." Jabari recognized the classic corporate tactic: agree in principle while delaying action until public attention moved elsewhere. "Unacceptable," he stated firmly. "Passengers are at risk now. My timeline stands." "Perhaps a compromise," Walter began. "This isn't a negotiation about profit margins," Jabari interrupted. "This is about basic human dignity and safety. Either Horizon commits to meaningful change now, or I'll hold a press conference this evening announcing my resignation and explaining exactly why." The threat landed like a bomb. Several board members immediately began calculating the stock price impact of such an announcement amid the ongoing crisis. "You wouldn't," Gerald challenged. "Try me," Jabari replied, holding his gaze. As this standoff unfolded in the boardroom across town, Zion and Zara Williams sat in their living room conducting their own battle via video interview with a major network news program. Despite their father's concerns about media exposure, the twins had insisted on speaking out. "We decided to share our story because it's not unique," Zara explained to the interviewer. "What happened to us happens to black travelers every day. The only difference is that most don't have a father who can hold the system accountable." "What would you say to those who suggest you should have simply moved to economy class to avoid the confrontation?" the interviewer asked. "Why should we give up seats we legally purchased because someone else's bias made them uncomfortable with our presence?" Zion responded, the butterfly bandage still visible above his eyebrow. "That's how discrimination persists, when people of color are expected to accommodate racism, rather than racists being expected to change their behavior." "Powerful point," the interviewer acknowledged. "And what about Jessica Whitman's claim that you were behaving aggressively?" "The videos show exactly how we behaved," Zara pointed out. "We remained seated, spoke respectfully, and presented our documentation multiple times. The only aggression came from the airline staff and security." As the interview concluded, the network ran a breaking news banner across the bottom of the screen. "Horizon Airlines board meeting now in third hour, discussing Williams reforms. Sources say CEO threatens resignation if proposals rejected." Back in the boardroom, the atmosphere had shifted again as board members received a flood of messages about the twins' powerful interview. Public support for the Williams family was surging across all demographics. "I've just received word," Patricia announced, checking her tablet, "that 3 major corporate clients have suspended their contracts with us pending the outcome of today's meeting. They specifically cite concerns about employee safety during business travel." This news, hitting the board members where it truly hurt, in the corporate profits, proved to be the tipping point. Richard Hargrove sighed heavily. "I think we need to recognize the reality of our situation. Mr. Williams's reforms, while ambitious, address legitimate concerns that are clearly shared by our customer base." He glanced around the table. "I move that we approve the Williams Protocol in its entirety, with the original 6-month implementation timeline." "Second," said Janet Chen, the lone female board member who had remained mostly silent throughout the debate. "Those in favor?" Richard called. One by one, hands raised around the table. Even Walter, the concerned CFO, reluctantly raised his. Only Gerald kept his hand firmly down. "Motion carries, 11-1, Richard announced. "Mr. Williams, you have the board's authorization to proceed with your reforms." Jabari nodded, satisfied but not celebratory. This was merely the first step in a long journey. "One more item," he added. "Given the clear conflict of interest that has come to light, I move for Gerald Winter's immediate resignation from this board." Gerald's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. I've served this company for 22 years. During which time you used your position to protect family members from the consequences of discriminatory behavior," Jabari pointed out. "Behavior that has now cost this company millions and tarnished its reputation. The very definition of a breach of fiduciary duty." Richard looked pained but nodded. "Gerald, given the circumstances, I think resignation is the appropriate course of action. Otherwise, we'll need to convene an ethics committee." Gerald looked around the table, finding no allies in the faces of his fellow board members. With a final glare at Jabari, he gathered his papers, stood, and walked out without another word. As the meeting adjourned, Richard approached Jabari privately. "Bold moves for your first week, Williams. Some would say too bold." "Bold would have been implementing these changes before my children were assaulted," Jabari replied. "This is just necessary correction." "Well," Richard mused, "in my 60 years in this industry, I've never seen anything quite like the past 48 hours. For what it's worth, I think you're right about the direction we need to go. I just hope you understand the resistance you'll face." "I do," Jabari assured him. "I've faced it my entire career. The difference is now I have the authority to do something about it." As he left the boardroom, Jabari received a text from Zion. "Dad, you're trending on Twitter. Williams Protocol is the #1 hashtag nationally." For the first time in 2 days, Jabari allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead would be challenging, but today at least felt like progress. 3 weeks after the incident that had captivated the nation, Jabari Williams stood before a packed auditorium at Horizon Airlines headquarters. Every seat was filled with employees ranging from baggage handlers to pilots, with thousands more, watching via live stream across the company's global network. This was Jabari's first all-hands address as CEO, an event that would normally be focused on quarterly results and corporate strategy. Today, however, had a different purpose. "I didn't plan to begin my tenure at Horizon this way," Jabari began, his deep voice carrying easily through the space without a microphone. "My first communications with many of you came through news headlines rather than proper introductions. For that, I apologize." He paused, surveying the sea of faces. Many looked uncertain, some defensive, others openly curious about their new leader. "But perhaps this unconventional beginning serves a purpose," he continued. "It strips away the corporate niceties and forces us to address fundamental truths that might otherwise remain comfortably buried beneath quarterly reports and team-building exercises." On the massive screen behind him, images appeared, not of the viral videos everyone expected, but of Horizon's own marketing materials through the decades. Smiling flight attendants, happy passengers, slogans about connecting people and places. Horizon Airlines was founded with a simple mission: to make the wonder of flight accessible to all, Jabari noted. Yet the reality is, for many travelers, our promise of accessibility comes with invisible asterisks and unwritten conditions. The screen shifted to a data visualization, passenger complaint statistics broken down by demographic categories, revealing stark disparities in reported negative experiences. "This isn't about politics or public relations," Jabari stated firmly. "This is about data. Black passengers are 7 times more likely to be removed from Horizon flights than white passengers. Latino travelers are 3 times more likely to be selected for random additional screening. Middle Eastern passengers are 9 times more likely to have their loyalty status questioned." Murmurs rippled through the audience as employees confronted numbers many had never seen before. "Now, I could stand here and share my personal story," Jabari continued. "I could tell you about watching my son bleed while being handcuffed, or my daughter weeping in a detention room. I could describe 30 years of being followed in first-class lounges by security, or having flight attendants check my ticket multiple times while ignoring other passengers. He paused, letting the personal reality sink in. But my experience isn't unique. It's depressingly common. The only difference is that most people who look like me don't have the platform or power to demand change when it happens to them. The screen changed again, showing the new training protocols and accountability measures collectively known as the Williams Protocol. Reactions among the audience were mixed, some nodding in approval, others crossing arms defensively. "I know, some of you are concerned," Jabari acknowledged. "You worry these changes imply you're being called racist, or that they'll make your jobs harder. I understand those fears. But this isn't about blame or added burden. It's about creating systems that help all of us serve all passengers with equal respect and dignity." As Jabari detailed the specific changes, from revised training to anonymous reporting tools to community oversight, the initial resistance in the room gradually softened. His approach was practical rather than accusatory, focused on specific behaviors rather than personal character judgments. "We can be the airline that truly welcomes everyone," he concluded, "or we can be the airline people of color warn their children about before traveling. That choice defines not just our brand, but our humanity." The applause that followed wasn't universal but was substantial, and notably more enthusiastic from the diverse employees scattered throughout the predominantly white audience. As Jabari left the stage, Patricia Delaney approached with an update. "The twins' video statement just passed 100 million views," she reported, "and their interview request list has grown to include every major network and most international outlets." While Jabari navigated the corporate transformation, Zion and Zara faced their own challenges. Their planned summer at Yale had been postponed by 2 weeks to allow Zion's concussion to heal. Now, as they prepared to finally depart, this time with security escorts arranged by Horizon, they wrestled with their unexpected public platform. "Are you sure you want to do this interview?" Zara asked her brother as they packed for their rescheduled trip. "We could just focus on school." Zion carefully folded a shirt, mindful of his still tender head. "That's what they want, for us to disappear quietly while the PR team handles everything. If we stay silent, nothing really changes." "Dad's implementing changes," Zara pointed out. "At one airline," Zion countered. "What about the hotels that follow black guests around? The stores that watch us like we're thieves? The schools that punish black students more harshly? This is bigger than Horizon." Zara nodded, understanding her brother's perspective. While she'd initially wanted to put the incident behind them, the thousands of messages they'd received from people sharing similar experiences had changed her mind. Their trauma had meaning if it could prevent others from suffering the same fate. Meanwhile, Jessica Whitman had not accepted her termination quietly. After her initial media appearances failed to generate sufficient sympathy, she had shifted strategies, positioning herself as a scapegoat for corporate policies. "I was simply following the suspicious behavior protocols we were trained to implement," she claimed in her latest interview. "If those protocols are discriminatory, that's management's responsibility, not mine." What Jessica didn't know was that Horizon's legal team had uncovered damning evidence, text messages she'd sent to security before the incident explicitly mentioning the twins' race as a reason for suspicion. 2 black teens in first-class seats 3AB need verification and possible removal. This evidence had been turned over to prosecutors, who were now considering criminal charges for filing false reports and civil rights violations. Keith Matthews faced even more serious consequences. The medical report on Zion's injuries indicated the use of excessive force, and 3 additional complaints of similar conduct had emerged since the incident went public. The district attorney had announced plans to pursue assault charges, with potential enhancements for civil rights violations. Perhaps most surprising was Connor Reynolds' trajectory. Initially defiant, the financial executive had watched his professional life implode as clients withdrew and colleagues distanced themselves. His company had placed him on indefinite leave, corporate speak for, "We're waiting for this to blow over before officially firing you." But something unexpected happened during Reynolds' professional exile. His college-age daughter had confronted him about the viral video, asking pointed questions about his behavior that forced genuine reflection. For the first time, Reynolds began examining his long-held assumptions about who belonged in spaces like first-class cabins. After weeks of self-examination, Reynolds had reached out through intermediaries, requesting a private meeting with the Williams family to apologize personally, a request they were still considering. As these individual stories unfolded, broader changes rippled through the airline industry. Competitor airlines, seeing Horizon's crisis as a cautionary tale, began preemptively reviewing their own practices. Industry publications that had initially framed the incident as an isolated case now ran feature articles on systemic discrimination in air travel. Congressional hearings on transportation equity, previously sparsely attended, suddenly commanded primetime coverage. The Williams twins had become reluctant symbols in a long-overdue national conversation. Their Yale acceptance letters, initially dismissed as fake by airport security, were now framed evidence of the prejudice that assumed black excellence must be fraudulent. At Horizon headquarters, Jabari reviewed the latest incident reports, the first compiled under the new Williams Protocol transparency requirements. The data showed a 40% reduction in passenger removals in just 3 weeks, with the demographic disparities already beginning to narrow. The simple act of documenting and reviewing these decisions had caused staff to be more thoughtful about when intervention was truly necessary. As he studied the promising early results, Jabari received a call from Richard Hargrove, the board chairman who had initially resisted the reforms. "Williams," the older man began, "I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" Jabari asked, genuinely curious. "For assuming your proposals were emotionally driven rather than strategically sound," Richard admitted. "The preliminary data is compelling, and the market has noticed. Our stock has recovered 12% as cancellations decrease." "I appreciate that, Richard," Jabari replied. "But this was never primarily about stock prices." "I'm beginning to understand that," Richard acknowledged. "My granddaughter sent me an article about flying while black, experiences I've never had to consider in 60 years of air travel. It's been educational." The conversation highlighted what Jabari had always believed, that meaningful change required both moral conviction and practical results. By demonstrating that equity and profitability could coexist, he was converting skeptics who might never be moved by appeals to justice alone. As the 3-week mark passed, the Williams family prepared for their next major decision. Yale had been extraordinarily accommodating, but the summer program was already underway. If Zion and Zara wanted to participate, they needed to travel to Connecticut immediately. "Are you sure you're ready?" Jabari asked his children as they gathered in the living room for a family meeting. "Academically, absolutely," Zara replied confidently. "Emotionally, I'm not sure any of us will ever be ready to board another flight." "But we can't let fear win," Zion added, the determination in his voice reminiscent of his father's. "That's what systems of oppression depend on, that we'll be too traumatized to keep fighting." Jabari looked at his children with a mixture of pride and sorrow. They had been forced to develop wisdom beyond their years, navigating a world that often viewed their very existence as threatening. "Then we move forward," he decided, "but this time, I'm flying with you." "Dad, you can't take time off right now," Zara protested. "The company needs you here implementing the protocols." "The company will manage for 2 days," Jabari insisted. "Some things are more important than corporate transitions. Besides, I think it sends the right message, that our CEO flies our routes and experiences our service firsthand." What none of them said aloud was the shared fear that despite all the changes, despite Jabari's position, despite the national attention, they might somehow face the same treatment again. Trauma created lasting shadows that policy changes alone couldn't immediately dispel. As evening fell, Jabari received an unexpected call from Patricia. "Sir, there's something you should see. Former employees are organizing." "Organizing what?" Jabari asked, immediately concerned. "Not a protest, surprisingly," Patricia clarified. "They're calling it accountability sessions. Flight attendants and gate agents who've witnessed discrimination but remained silent are coming forward to acknowledge their complicity and commit to change." The initiative had started with a junior flight attendant who had been on the fateful flight with the twins. Troubled by her own inaction during the incident, She had organized a forum for airline employees to discuss how racial bias manifested in their daily work and how they could actively counter it. "It's spreading beyond Horizon," Patricia added. "Employees from 4 other airlines have joined the sessions." This grassroots movement represented something policy alone couldn't create: cultural change driven by personal conviction rather than corporate mandate. For the first time since the incident, Jabari felt genuinely hopeful that the transformation might outlast the headlines. That night, as the Williams family finalized plans for their journey to Yale, Jabari sat with his children on their back porch, gazing at the stars visible through Atlanta's light pollution. "When your mother was still with us," he said softly, "she always told me that suffering should never be wasted. If you must endure it, find meaning in it." The twins nodded, remembering their mother's wisdom despite the years that had passed since her death. "I wish she could see who you've become," Jabari continued. "Not just brilliant students, but young people with the courage to stand up for yourselves and others." "She'd be proud of you too, Dad," Zara offered. "Taking on an entire industry's broken practices instead of just accepting an apology and compensation." As they sat in comfortable silence, Jabari's phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Aviation Industry Announces Joint Commission on Equitable Treatment, Inspired by Williams Protocol." Sometimes change came through dramatic confrontations. Other times, it came through quiet persistence. The Williams family had catalyzed both, turning personal trauma into a movement that promised to protect countless future travelers from similar experiences. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The journey to Yale still loomed with its emotional hurdles. The corporate transformation at Horizon remained fragile and incomplete. The legal proceedings against Jessica, Keith, and potentially others had only begun. But tonight, under the stars, the Williams family allowed themselves to feel something that had been in short supply since the incident: hope. 6 weeks had transformed the landscape completely. The sprawling Yale campus buzzed with summer activity as students hurried between Gothic buildings, their animated discussions floating across the manicured quads. Among them walked Zion and I. Zara Williams, now recognizable to most but no longer the center of constant attention they had been during their first days at the prestigious summer program. "Professor Daniels wants me to submit my paper on algorithmic bias to an undergraduate journal," Zara mentioned as they crossed the courtyard toward the dining hall. "Says it's graduate-level work." "Of course it is," Zion replied with brotherly pride. "Meanwhile, I'm still trying to convince Professor Whitaker that hip-hop lyrics are legitimate literary texts for critical analysis." "You'll win him over," Zara assured him. "Your presentation yesterday was brilliant." The normalcy of their academic conversation belied the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. 6 weeks earlier, their arrival at Yale had been a media spectacle, with news vans parked at campus entrances and fellow students secretly recording their first-class appearances. Now they had become simply Zion and Zara, exceptional students known for their intellect rather than just their viral moment. The scar above Zion's eyebrow had faded to a thin white line, visible only in certain lighting. The psychological wounds had proven more stubborn, with both twins still experiencing occasional anxiety in crowded spaces and instinctive wariness around security personnel. But weekly sessions with Yale's trauma counselor were helping them process their experience in healthier ways. Back in Atlanta, Horizon Airlines had undergone its own transformation. The Williams Protocol was now fully implemented across all operations, with early results exceeding even the most optimistic projections. Passenger removal incidents had decreased by 63% overall, with the racial disparity in such incidents narrowing from 7-to-1 to less than 2-to-1. Still imperfect, but representing significant progress. The protocol's core elements had expanded beyond their original scope. What began as anti-bias training for customer-facing staff now included hiring practices, promotion criteria, and vendor selection. The External Oversight Committee, initially focused on passenger treatment, now reviewed all aspects of company culture for evidence of systemic barriers. Most significantly, Horizon had become an unlikely industry leader in social responsibility. Airlines that had initially mocked Jabari's overcorrection now found themselves scrambling to implement similar measures as consumers increasingly considered equity practices in their travel decisions. The hashtag #IFlyingWhileBlack had evolved from a documentation of trauma to an accountability tool, with travelers sharing both negative and positive experiences across airlines. Jessica Whitman and Keith Matthews had faced different outcomes for their roles in the incident. Jessica had accepted a plea deal on civil rights violation charges, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time. The terms of her probation prohibited her from working in the transportation industry and required her to complete extensive education on the history and impact of racial discrimination. Keith faced more serious consequences. The district attorney had pursued felony assault charges based on the video evidence and medical reports of Zion's injuries. After initially pleading not guilty, Keith had changed course when 3 similar complaints emerged from his personnel file, complaints that had been buried until Horizon's new transparency policies brought them to light. He ultimately accepted a plea deal including 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and permanent revocation of his security credentials. The most surprising development involved Connor Reynolds, the businessman whose complaint had escalated the initial confrontation. After months of reflection and conversations with diversity educators, Reynolds had undergone what appeared to be a genuine transformation. He had published a candid self-examination in the Wall Street Journal titled, "How I Confronted My Own Bias," detailing the unconscious assumptions that had led him to question the twins' presence in first class. Reynolds had used his financial resources to establish a scholarship fund for minority students interested in business and aviation, with Zion and Zara serving as the first selection committee members. While the twins had initially been skeptical of his overtures, his consistent actions over time had convinced them of his sincerity. His former company, after placing him on extended leave, had ultimately welcomed him back in a new role focused on creating more inclusive corporate cultures. On this particular Wednesday afternoon, as the twins enjoyed their lunch on a sunny Yale courtyard, their phones simultaneously lit up with a video call from their father. They found a quiet corner to answer. "Dad, how was the congressional testimony?" Zara asked eagerly. Jabari Williams' face appeared on screen, looking tired but satisfied. He had just finished addressing a House committee on transportation equity, using Horizon's data to illustrate both the problems and potential solutions. "Surprisingly productive," he replied. Both parties seemed genuinely interested in the protocol's results. The fact that we've improved efficiency while addressing equity concerns makes it harder to dismiss as just a woke initiative. "Any pushback?" Zion inquired. Some representatives questioned whether federal regulations are necessary when market forces are already pushing companies to adopt similar measures, Jabari explained. "I argued that baseline standards would ensure consistent protection, regardless of which airline someone chooses." The conversation shifted to family matters. Jabari's plans to visit campus that weekend, the twins' upcoming research presentations, and whether they'd return to Atlanta or remain at Yale for the brief break between programs. "Oh, before I forget," Jabari added as they were about to end the call, "the Williams Foundation received official nonprofit status approval today." This was their latest venture, a foundation established with the settlement funds from their lawsuit against the airport authority. Rather than keeping the substantial compensation for themselves, the family had dedicated it to supporting civil rights education and advocacy in transportation sectors. "That's fantastic," Zara exclaimed. "Now we can formally launch the scholarship program." "And the incident documentation app," Zion added. They had been developing a platform for travelers to report and track discrimination experiences, creating data that could drive further policy changes. As they ended the call, the twins noticed a group of students glancing their way. Once, such attention would have made them uncomfortable, assuming they were being recognized from the viral videos. Now they understood it was more likely related to their academic accomplishments, Zara's award-winning research presentation last week, or Zion's powerful spoken word performance at the student showcase. They had refused to be defined by what happened to them. Instead, they had incorporated it into their academic pursuits. Zara exploring the intersection of technology and bias, Zion examining how trauma narratives shape identity. Their personal experience had deepened their scholarship rather than derailing it. Later that evening, as they prepared for their father's weekend visit, Zara noticed Zion staring at his laptop screen with an unusual expression. "What is it?" she asked, moving, to see what had captured his attention. On screen was an email from Horizon Airline's customer service department, a standard passenger satisfaction survey for their upcoming return flight to Atlanta. The mundane normality of it made both twins laugh. "Remember when just the thought of flying again gave us anxiety attacks?" Zion mused. "And now it's just transportation," Zara replied. "Not without its emotional baggage, but manageable." "Speaking of baggage," Zion grinned, "are you checking a bag this time or just carrying on?" "Very funny," Zara rolled her eyes at the pun. "Carry on only. Less chance of anything going wrong." The casual discussion about travel logistics represented perhaps the most significant victory of all, the reclaiming of normalcy. While the incident would always remain part of their story, it no longer dominated their daily thoughts or defined their interactions with the world. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, Horizon Airlines announced plans to commemorate it in an unexpected way. Rather than hiding from the painful history, the company had embraced it as a pivotal moment in its evolution. The anniversary would mark the launch of a comprehensive industry resource center dedicated to equitable transportation practices, with the Williams Protocol as its cornerstone. Airlines worldwide had begun adopting elements of the protocol, recognizing that preventing discrimination was not merely morally right, but also commercially advantageous. Passenger loyalty data showed that transparent equity practices increasingly influenced consumer choices, particularly among younger travelers. The night before their father's arrival, the twins attended a small gathering at their program director's home. As conversations flowed around literature, politics, and academic aspirations, a fellow student asked them the inevitable question: "Do you regret what happened? Given all the stress and trauma, would you rather it never occurred?" The twins exchanged thoughtful glances before Zion answered. "Regret isn't quite the right word. No one would choose to experience discrimination or assault, but I don't regret standing our ground when we were wrongly targeted. And I don't regret using our platform to create change," Zara added. "Before this happened, these issues were invisible to many people. Now they can't look away." Their response reflected the complex legacy of that fateful day, a traumatic experience transformed into a catalyst for systemic change. They had discovered that justice often required not just acknowledging pain, but channeling it toward something constructive. The following afternoon, the twins stood at the small regional airport awaiting their father's arrival. As passengers streamed through the arrivals gate, they spotted Jabari, imposing as always in his tailored suit, yet with a lightness in his step that had been absent during the intense weeks following the incident. The family embraced, drawing curious glances from travelers who recognized them from media coverage. But these looks contained something new: respect, rather than mere curiosity. "How was the flight?" Zara asked as they walked toward the exit. "Uneventful," Jabari replied with a smile. "The captain actually announced me to the cabin, said he was proud to have the CEO on board who's making air travel more equitable for everyone." "Quite a change from a year ago," Zion observed. "The work is far from finished," Jabari reminded them. "One airline improving doesn't fix a systemic problem, but it's a start." As they drove through the picturesque Connecticut countryside toward campus, the conversation turned to the future. The twins had received early admission offers from several Ivy League universities, including Yale. Jabari's leadership at Horizon had established him as a corporate innovator, with other companies seeking his guidance on their own transformations. The Williams family had never sought the spotlight that now followed them. They had simply been Black travelers expecting the same respect afforded to everyone else. When that basic dignity was denied, they had refused to accept it as inevitable. Their story resonated because it reflected both the persistent reality of discrimination and the possibility of meaningful change. In a society often paralyzed by the enormity of systemic problems, they had demonstrated how specific, measurable actions could create ripple effects beyond their original scope. 1 year after blood was spilled on a first-class cabin floor, the aviation industry had begun a long overdue reckoning with its treatment of minority passengers. Horizon Airlines had transformed from a cautionary tale to a case study in corporate responsibility. And the Williams family had discovered that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was not just righteous anger, but strategic, persistent advocacy for something better. As their car approached the Yale campus, Zion gazed out the window at the historic buildings where generations of America's elite had been educated, institutions that had once excluded people who looked like him through both explicit policies and implicit biases. "You know what I think sometimes?" he said quietly. "What's that?" his father asked. "I think about how many brilliant black minds never got the opportunities we have because they were told they didn't belong in certain spaces," Zion reflected. "How many potential leaders, scientists, and artists were blocked by the kind of barriers we encountered." "That's why this work matters," Jabari replied. "Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us." As they parked near the residence hall, several students recognized the family and waved in greeting, not as celebrities, but as valued community members. This, perhaps, was the most meaningful transformation of all. The shift from being seen as intruders to being recognized as people who unquestionably belonged. The Williams family's journey teaches us that systemic change requires both courage and strategy. When confronted with discrimination, standing your ground may be difficult, but can spark transformation beyond your individual situation. The twins demonstrated that documenting injustice creates accountability, while Jabari showed how leadership positions can be platforms for meaningful reform, rather than just personal advancement. This story reveals how racial discrimination often hides behind policies and protocols that appear neutral but are applied unequally. It highlights the difference between those who witness injustice and look away versus those who acknowledge reality and work towards solutions. Perhaps most importantly, the Williams family reminds us that traumatic experiences, while painful, can be channeled into powerful advocacy. They refuse to be defined solely as victims, instead becoming architects of change within systems designed to exclude them. Their experience shows that sustainable progress requires both policy reform and cultural transformation. Neither alone is sufficient. The ripple effects of their stand demonstrate how individual courage can inspire collective action. When we refuse to accept discrimination as normal, we create possibility for all who come after us. Have you ever witnessed racial discrimination? In public spaces like airports, restaurants, or stores? What did you do in that moment? Comment, "I spoke up" if you've ever intervened, or "I wish I had" if you regret staying silent. Your voice matters in these situations. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories about overcoming injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of everyday discrimination and how we can all be part of the solution. What situation in your life could use the courage and determination the Williams family showed? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening with an open heart. And remember, change happens one brave decision at a time. See you in the next video.